Fix my plane, and I'll grant you one wish." The words echoed across the private hangar, drawing every mechanic, pilot, and executive into stunned silence. Most men would have asked for $1 million. Some would have asked for a promotion. But Ethan Brooks simply reached into his worn jacket, unfolded a small photograph of an 8-year-old girl with bright blue eyes and a missing front tooth, looked back at the powerful woman standing beside the disabled jet, and quietly said, "My daughter needs a mom." No one laughed. No one spoke. Even the restless hum of the hangar seemed to fade beneath the weight of a wish no amount of money could ever buy. The Gulfstream sat motionless beneath brilliant white lights, its polished fuselage reflecting the anxious faces gathered below. Executives checked expensive watches. Pilots whispered to one another. Every passing minute threatened to destroy a business deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Victoria Hayes, founder and CEO of Hayes Aviation Group, stood perfectly still beside the aircraft, dressed in a tailored Navy suit that looked as sharp as her reputation. Across the country, she was known as the woman who never accepted failure, never missed a deadline, and never broke a promise. Her company connected Fortune 500 boardrooms, humanitarian missions, and presidential campaigns. Today, however, none of that mattered. Her flagship aircraft refused to fly. 3 engineering teams had already examined the problem. 2 specialists had been flown in from another state. Every report ended with the same frustrating conclusion. The fault remained hidden. Then someone pointed toward a quiet maintenance technician kneeling beneath the left wing. Ethan Brooks had spent nearly 15 years repairing airplanes few people ever noticed. His work clothes carried faint traces of grease despite being freshly washed, and his old toolbox showed more scratches than paint. He never rushed. He never complained. While others argued over computer diagnostics, he simply listened to the engine with calm patience, almost as though machines told stories most people had forgotten how to hear. Victoria crossed the polished concrete floor and folded her arms. "You think you can solve what my engineers couldn't?" she asked. Ethan stood slowly, meeting her eyes without arrogance. "I think I can try." Some executives exchanged skeptical smiles. One quietly muttered that hope was becoming expensive. Ethan climbed into the access panel, examined a cluster of wiring hidden deep behind an inspection compartment, then paused. His fingers rested lightly against a connector no larger than a silver dollar. He smiled almost imperceptibly. 10 minutes later, the engine awakened with a smooth, confident roar that filled the hangar. Heads turned. Pilots stared at their instruments in disbelief. Senior engineers checked their tablets twice, unable to explain what had happened so quickly. Victoria watched the aircraft come alive, then slowly turned toward the man already closing his toolbox. "You just saved my company from a disaster," she said. "Name your reward." "Anything within my power." Ethan looked at the photograph again before answering with the same quiet certainty that had carried him through years of raising Lily alone. "My daughter doesn't need another toy. She doesn't need a bigger house. She doesn't even ask for vacations. Every birthday, every Christmas, every bedtime prayer, she asks for the same thing. My daughter needs a mom." Edit Ethan Brooks drove home long after the sun had disappeared behind the rolling hills outside Cedar Ridge Municipal Airport. His old pickup truck rattled gently along the familiar 2-lane highway, the dashboard glowing softly while autumn leaves drifted across the pavement like quiet memories. The excitement from the hangar had already faded, replaced by the peaceful routine that mattered far more than any remarkable moment at work. Inside the passenger seat rested a small paper bag holding Lily's favorite chicken noodle soup and a cinnamon roll from the bakery down the street. He never came home empty-handed if he could help it. The small white farmhouse where they lived had peeling paint, an aging front porch, and a swing that creaked whenever the evening breeze wandered through the maple trees. But to Ethan, it was still the safest place in the world. As soon as he stepped inside, he heard quick footsteps racing across the wooden floor. Lily threw her arms around him with the kind of joy only a child could give. "Did you fix another airplane today, Daddy?" she asked with bright eyes. Ethan smiled as he knelt to her height. "Just another day of solving little problems." Lily accepted the answer without another question because she had learned that her father never measured people by applause or accomplishments. She only cared that he always came home. They shared dinner at the small kitchen table beneath an old clock that had belonged to Ethan's parents. The conversation wandered from spelling tests to a science project about butterflies, then to whether the neighborhood squirrel had finally stopped stealing birdseed from the feeder outside the window. It was an ordinary evening, and Ethan treasured ordinary evenings more than extraordinary days. After dinner, they washed dishes together, laughing when soap bubbles floated through the kitchen like tiny balloons. Later, they settled into the worn living room sofa where Ethan read another chapter from their favorite adventure novel. Lily rested her head against his shoulder while the fireplace filled the room with gentle warmth and the scent of burning oak. The following morning began before sunrise, just as it always did for Victoria Hayes. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the skyline from the top floor of Hayes Aviation Group headquarters, where the first golden light reflected across polished glass and steel. Her assistant placed a fresh cup of black coffee beside a neatly organized stack of reports, but Victoria barely noticed. She was already studying flight schedules, acquisition proposals, maintenance costs, and investor updates with the calm precision that had made her one of the most respected chief executive officers in American aviation. Every decision carried enormous responsibility. Thousands of employees depended on her judgment. Millions of passengers trusted aircraft maintained under her company's name. There was no room for hesitation, and certainly no room for emotion. At least that was what she had taught herself to believe. Yet every time she tried returning to the financial reports, another memory quietly interrupted her concentration. She could still hear Ethan Brooks answering her impossible offer with complete sincerity. He had not asked for wealth, influence, or opportunity. He had spoken only of his daughter. Victoria slowly closed the report in front of her and looked out across the city. "Who asked for something like that?" she whispered to herself. Her assistant, Claire Morrison, noticed the unusual silence. "Is everything all right?" she asked carefully. Victoria gave a polite smile that convinced no one. "Do we have a personnel file on the maintenance technician from Cedar Ridge?" Claire looked surprised. "Ethan Brooks." Victoria nodded once. "Please send it to my office." Less than 15 minutes later, the file rested on her desk. It contained nothing extraordinary. 15 years of excellent maintenance records. Perfect safety evaluations. No disciplinary actions. No requests for promotion. No complaints. No recognition ceremonies. He simply arrived early every morning, completed his work with remarkable consistency, and returned home each evening. Claire glanced toward the folder. "He seems like a good employee." Victoria continued reading. "Sometimes the quietest people carry the heaviest stories." The sentence escaped almost without thought. After Claire quietly left the office, Victoria discovered one final page attached to the back of the file. It listed emergency contact information. There was only one name: Lily Brooks, daughter. No spouse. No secondary contact. Victoria rested the paper on her desk and leaned back slowly. For a long moment, she remembered another life, years before board meetings and corporate acquisitions, when she had imagined having a family of her own. Those dreams had disappeared after a painful engagement ended with broken trust and public embarrassment, leaving her convinced that love could be negotiated like a business contract. Since then, she had surrounded herself with schedules instead of relationships and achievements instead of memories. Success had filled every calendar, but it had never filled the quiet places inside her heart. She stood and walked toward the window again, watching airplanes rise gracefully into the bright autumn sky one after another. Every departure carried people towards someone they loved, while she returned each evening to an empty penthouse overlooking a city that never truly knew her. For the first time in years, Victoria questioned whether she had spent too much of her life building an empire while quietly abandoning the life she once hoped to share with someone else. Then she reached for her phone, paused for several seconds, and finally spoke one simple instruction: "Clear my afternoon schedule. I think it is time I kept a promise." That afternoon, the quiet rhythm of Cedar Ridge Municipal Airport continued as though nothing extraordinary had happened the day before. Small private aircraft taxied across the runway while maintenance crews moved methodically from one inspection to another. Ethan Brooks was already halfway through replacing a hydraulic valve inside a mid-sized business jet, completely unaware that a sleek black sedan had just rolled through the security gate. When Victoria Hayes stepped onto the tarmac, conversations softened without anyone asking them to. Executives usually arrived surrounded by assistants and cameras. Today she came with only Claire Morrison carrying a slim folder and a respectful distance. Ethan climbed down from the maintenance platform, wiping his hands with a clean shop towel before greeting her with the same calm expression he offered everyone else. "Good afternoon, Ms. Hayes." Victoria noticed that he showed no excitement, no nervousness, and certainly no expectation. He simply waited politely. "I hope I am not interrupting your work," she said. Ethan glanced toward the open engine compartment. Airplanes teach patience. They do not mind waiting a few minutes if people are honest with them. Claire smiled quietly at the unusual answer, while Victoria found herself doing something she rarely did during business meetings. She laughed. It was brief and genuine. "I have been thinking about what you asked for," she admitted. Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment before speaking. "You do not owe me anything. I only answered your question honestly." Victoria folded her arms thoughtfully. "Most people would have negotiated. You never did." Ethan shook his head. Some things should never become negotiations. The wind carried the distant sound of another aircraft climbing into the clear blue sky. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. Finally, Victoria asked, "May I ask something personal?" Ethan nodded once. "How old is Lily?" "She turned 8 in September." "Does she remember her mother?" Ethan looked toward the runway where sunlight shimmered across the pavement. "Only through photographs, stories, and the recipes we still cook together every Sunday." His voice remained steady, but there was a quiet tenderness that no practiced speech could imitate. "I promised myself that Lily would grow up surrounded by kindness instead of sadness. Some days I succeed better than others." Victoria listened without interrupting. She had negotiated billion-dollar mergers, addressed international investors, and spoken before packed conference halls. Yet this simple conversation demanded more courage than any boardroom ever had. "Would it be all right if I met her?" she asked gently. Ethan looked genuinely surprised. "You mean as part of keeping your promise?" Victoria hesitated. "I mean because I would like to know the little girl whose happiness mattered more to her father than anything else I could have offered." Ethan considered her words carefully. He had spent years protecting Lily from disappointment, and trust was never something he gave away quickly. But there was no pride in Victoria's voice now, only sincerity. He finally smiled, small but unmistakably warm. "Tomorrow evening, we usually bake apple pie after homework. Lily believes every pie tastes better if someone new helps stir the filling. You would be welcome to join us." Victoria felt something unfamiliar settle quietly inside her heart, something no business success had ever created. She simply nodded and answered, "Then tomorrow evening, I will bring the ice cream." The next evening arrived wrapped in the soft amber light of early autumn, and for the first time in years Victoria Hayes found herself driving away from skyscrapers instead of toward them. The expensive sedan felt strangely out of place as it rolled along the narrow country road lined with weathered fences and maple trees glowing with shades of gold and crimson. A carton of premium vanilla ice cream rested carefully on the passenger seat, but somehow it seemed far less important than the quiet anticipation growing inside her. She had attended state dinners, international conferences, and celebrations attended by celebrities and world leaders, yet none of those invitations had ever made her wonder whether she would be accepted. Ethan opened the front door before she reached the porch, wearing a simple flannel shirt instead of work clothes. "You found us," he said with a gentle smile. Victoria held up the ice cream with an almost embarrassed expression. "I was told pie deserves proper company." Before Ethan could answer, a burst of laughter echoed from inside the house. Lily appeared in the hallway wearing an oversized apron dusted with flour from top to bottom. Her bright blue eyes widened with excitement. "You really came." Victoria smiled warmly. "I promised I would." Lily reached for the ice cream with both hands as though she had been entrusted with something precious. "Daddy says promises are supposed to arrive before dessert melts." Ethan laughed quietly. "I may have said something like that." The kitchen smelled of cinnamon, fresh apples, and warm butter. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains while an old radio played gentle country music in the background. Nothing inside the modest farmhouse matched the polished perfection of Victoria's penthouse, yet every corner carried a sense of peace she had almost forgotten existed. Lily eagerly placed a wooden mixing bowl between herself and Victoria. "Daddy says the secret is not stirring too fast," she explained seriously. "If you hurry, the pie gets nervous." Victoria looked toward Ethan with amused surprise. He shrugged. I have learned that arguing with an 8-year-old about pie psychology is usually a losing battle. All three of them laughed together. As they peeled apples and measured cinnamon, conversation drifted naturally from favorite books to school projects, airplanes, and the stray orange cat that occasionally visited the porch. Victoria noticed something remarkable. Ethan never interrupted Lily. He listened to every story as though each one deserved his complete attention. When Lily accidentally spilled a handful of flour across the counter, she froze and looked down guiltily. Victoria expected a scolding. Instead, Ethan handed her a clean towel. Looks like the counter wanted to help bake tonight, too. Lily giggled with relief and quickly cleaned the mess herself. Victoria watched the simple exchange in thoughtful silence. Respect lived quietly inside this home. It appeared in patient words, gentle smiles, and ordinary moments that no camera would ever record. Later, while the pie baked in the oven, Lily disappeared down the hallway and returned carrying a framed family photograph. It showed Ethan holding a much younger Lily beside a woman whose smile seemed filled with quiet kindness. Lily carefully placed the picture beside Victoria. That is my mommy, she whispered. Daddy tells me about her every Sunday, so I will never forget her laugh. Victoria studied the photograph before looking back at the little girl. There was no bitterness in Lily's voice, only love. Then Lily reached for Victoria's hand with innocent confidence and asked the one question that no business strategy, legal contract, or executive decision could have prepared her to answer. Do you think somebody can choose to become family one day? Victoria did not answer immediately. She looked at the small hand resting gently on hers and realized that the question deserved honesty instead of comfort. I think family begins with love, she said softly. Sometimes people are born into it, and sometimes they choose it one kind moment at a time. Lily smiled as though the answer fit perfectly inside her heart. That is what Daddy says too. Ethan quietly carried the warm apple pie to the table, pretending not to notice the conversation even though every word had reached him. The evening passed with laughter, homemade dessert, and stories that grew easier with every passing minute. When Victoria finally stood to leave, Lily hurried to the front porch carrying a small paper bag decorated with colorful crayons. This is for tomorrow, she explained. Victoria opened it carefully and found 3 homemade sugar cookies shaped like tiny airplanes. One had blue frosting, one had white frosting, and one was decorated with a bright red heart across both wings. Tucked beneath the cookies was a folded note written in careful handwriting. It simply read, "Thank you for helping us smile tonight." During the drive back to the city, Victoria never turned on the radio. The paper bag rested on the passenger seat where she glanced at it every few miles, smiling more than once without realizing it. The lights of downtown eventually appeared across the horizon, followed by the familiar glass towers that usually filled her with determination. Tonight they felt strangely quiet. The next morning began with another executive meeting, another conference room, and another schedule filled to the minute. Senior vice presidents discussed expansion plans, while financial analysts projected charts across enormous screens. Victoria listened respectfully, but part of her mind remained inside a small farmhouse kitchen where flour dust floated through warm sunlight, and an 8-year-old girl believed pie could become nervous if stirred too quickly. Near the end of the meeting, one executive recommended eliminating several maintenance positions at smaller regional airports to improve quarterly profits. Before anyone else could respond, Victoria calmly closed the presentation. Absolutely not, she said. The room fell silent. Our company exists because people take pride in work that often goes unnoticed. We will not reward loyalty by making it disappear. Several board members exchanged surprised glances. Her decision reduced projected profits, yet she never hesitated. After the meeting, Claire quietly caught up with her in the hallway. You have changed your mind about several things lately, she observed with a gentle smile. Victoria looked toward the enormous windows overlooking the runway where aircraft lifted gracefully into the clear autumn sky. Perhaps I am finally remembering what success was supposed to be for. That afternoon, she left the office earlier than anyone expected. Instead of returning to the penthouse, she stopped at a neighborhood bookstore, then a small toy shop, and finally a grocery store where she carefully chose fresh apples, cinnamon, and another carton of vanilla ice cream. None of the purchases appeared on any corporate expense report. They belonged to something much more valuable. As the cashier handed her the shopping bags, Victoria caught her own reflection in the glass entrance. For the first time in many years, the woman looking back no longer seemed like someone rushing toward another achievement. She looked like someone quietly hoping she would be invited back to a place that already felt a little like home. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm none of them had expected. Every Wednesday after school and every Sunday afternoon, Victoria found herself driving away from conference rooms and toward the little farmhouse outside Cedar Ridge. Sometimes she brought books for Lily. Sometimes she brought fresh flowers for the kitchen table. Other times she arrived with nothing at all except a willingness to help prepare dinner or wash dishes beside Ethan while Lily proudly explained another school project. Those ordinary hours slowly became the brightest part of Victoria's week. She learned how Ethan always packed Lily's lunch before making his own coffee, how he repaired neighbors' lawn mowers without charging anyone who could not afford it, and how he never allowed disappointment to become an excuse for bitterness. His quiet dignity appeared in 1,000 unnoticed choices. One rainy Saturday afternoon, the three of them spent hours assembling a wooden birdhouse on the front porch. Lily insisted that every family should have birds nearby because, according to her, happy songs made home stronger. Victoria laughed as bright yellow paint somehow found its way onto everyone's hands. Ethan looked at the two of them smiling beneath the porch roof while rain tapped gently against the old tin gutters, and for the first time since losing his wife, the silence inside his heart no longer felt empty. Yet beyond the peaceful walls of the farmhouse, another story was beginning to unfold. At Hayes Aviation Group headquarters, whispers quietly spread through executive offices. Several board members had noticed Victoria leaving work early more often than usual. Investors questioned why the chief executive officer had suddenly canceled evening networking events. A business columnist published photographs showing Victoria carrying grocery bags through a small town instead of attending an important charity gala. Within days, the headlines became louder than the truth. Anonymous sources claimed the powerful executive was secretly involved with an airport employee. Commentators suggested the relationship had been carefully staged to improve the company's public image. None of them knew Ethan. None of them had met Lily. They simply filled empty spaces with convenient assumptions. Claire Morrison closed her office door before speaking. "The board wants answers before next week's shareholder meeting," she said gently. Victoria remained calm as she looked through the newspaper resting on her desk. A photograph showed Ethan helping Lily climb onto a hay bale during a community harvest festival. Someone had taken the picture from a distance. The headline called it a carefully planned publicity campaign. Victoria quietly folded the newspaper and set it aside. "They managed to photograph kindness," she said softly, and somehow still misunderstood it. Claire hesitated before asking the question everyone else avoided. "Will you stop seeing them?" Victoria looked toward the window where one of the company's aircraft disappeared into the clouds. Her answer came without hesitation. If success requires abandoning good people, then it is not success worth protecting. That evening, Ethan received an unexpected phone call from a longtime co-worker warning him about the growing media attention. Ethan thanked him sincerely, hung up the phone, and sat quietly on the porch swing while the last light of day faded behind the trees. He knew public attention could easily disturb the peaceful life Lily deserved. Inside the house, Lily carefully taped another drawing to the refrigerator. It showed three smiling figures holding hands beneath a bright blue sky. Above them, she had written in colorful letters, "Some families begin with promises, but they grow because people choose each other every day." The annual shareholder meeting filled the grand auditorium with polished confidence, tailored suits, and quiet expectations. Television cameras lined the back wall, while financial reporters waited with notebooks open, hoping for headlines about record profits and bold expansion plans. Instead, an unexpected silence settled over the room as Victoria Hayes walked onto the stage carrying only a slim folder rather than the thick presentation everyone had anticipated. The enormous screen behind her displayed the Hayes Aviation Group logo, but she made no move to begin the usual financial review. She stood calmly behind the podium, looking across the hundreds of investors, board members, and executives who had trusted her leadership for years. One board member cleared his throat and leaned toward the microphone. "Before we begin, The board requests clarification regarding recent reports concerning your personal relationship with a maintenance technician employed by this company. Murmurs spread across the auditorium. Camera lenses shifted toward Victoria, waiting for denial, explanation, or carefully rehearsed corporate language. She remained perfectly still. His name is Ethan Brooks, she said with quiet confidence. He is one of the finest employees this company has ever had. Another executive spoke before the room could settle. The issue is not his work performance. The concern is public perception. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. Then perhaps public perception deserves better information. She stepped away from the podium and allowed several seconds of silence to pass. Weeks ago, my aircraft suffered a critical mechanical failure. Multiple specialists could not identify the problem. Ethan repaired it without asking for recognition, money, or advancement. When I offered him one wish, he asked for nothing for himself. He spoke only of his daughter. The room grew noticeably quieter. Since then, I have spent time with that family. I have watched a father whose greatest achievement is not repairing airplanes, but raising a little girl with kindness, honesty, and hope. If that reflects poorly on this company, then we have forgotten what character looks like. Reporters stopped typing. Even the board members who had prepared objections listened without interruption. Victoria slowly opened the folder in her hands, then closed it again without reading a single page. I was expected to announce a restructuring plan that would eliminate positions at several regional facilities. I will not approve it. I was encouraged to distance myself from people whose lives do not fit neatly into headlines. I will not do that either. Businesses can replace equipment. They cannot replace integrity once it is surrendered. A long silence settled across the auditorium before an elderly shareholder slowly rose to his feet. He had owned company stock for more than 30 years. Without saying a word, he began to applaud. Another investor joined him. Then another. Within moments, the applause filled the entire room, not because of quarterly earnings or market projections, but because someone had chosen principles over convenience. Several miles away, Ethan sat quietly on the front porch while Lily finished coloring another picture at the kitchen table. His phone vibrated gently with a message from Claire Morrison containing a single photograph. It showed Victoria standing before the entire company with calm determination. Beneath the picture, she had written only one sentence. Some promises become bigger than the people who make them. Ethan smiled softly before placing the phone back into his pocket, unaware that before the day was over, Victoria would arrive at the farmhouse carrying no business proposal, no press statement, and no prepared speech, only the courage to ask the question that had quietly lived inside her heart from the very first day they met. The evening sky above Cedar Ridge was painted with soft shades of orange and gold when Victoria Hayes turned onto the familiar country road leading to Ethan Brooks's farmhouse. For once, she was not thinking about contracts, investors, or the next challenge waiting on her desk. She carried no presentation folder, no company documents, and no carefully prepared statement. In her hands was only a small box from the local bakery and a handwritten card she had rewritten several times before finally deciding that simple words were the most honest ones. When Ethan opened the door, he immediately noticed something different in her expression. The confident CEO who commanded conference rooms across the country was gone. Standing before him was simply Victoria, a woman carrying gratitude, uncertainty, and hope. "I saw what happened today," Ethan said quietly. Victoria smiled. "Then you know I have a lot to explain." Ethan stepped aside and welcomed her inside. The farmhouse looked exactly as it always did. Warm lights filled the kitchen. Lily's drawings covered the refrigerator. The old wooden clock continued ticking above the doorway. It was not impressive by the standards of the world Victoria lived in, but somehow it felt more valuable than every luxury room she had ever entered. Lily came running from her bedroom, holding a book. "Victoria, you came." Victoria knelt down and smiled. "I did, and I brought something important." She handed Lily the small bakery box. Inside were 3 cookies shaped like airplanes, each decorated differently. Lily laughed with excitement. "You remembered." Victoria nodded. "Some things are worth remembering." Later that night, after dinner was finished and Lily had fallen asleep with her favorite book beside her, Ethan and Victoria sat quietly on the front porch. The evening breeze moved gently through the trees, carrying the distant sound of crickets and the peaceful feeling of a place untouched by the rush of the outside world. I need to tell you something, Victoria said. Ethan looked toward her. You do not have to. She smiled softly. That is exactly what makes this different. She looked out toward the fields beyond the house. For years, I thought people valued me because of what I built. My company, my reputation, my success. But spending time with you and Lily showed me something I forgot. Ethan listened without interrupting. A person is not measured by what they own. They are measured by what they give when nobody is watching. A quiet moment passed between them. I do not know what the future looks like, Victoria continued. I do not want to make promises I cannot keep. But I know I want to be part of the life you and Lily are building. Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment, thinking about all the years he had spent protecting his daughter from disappointment. Then he looked back at Victoria. Lily does not need someone perfect, he said. Neither do I. Victoria smiled through the emotion in her eyes. Good. Because I am not perfect. Ethan laughed quietly. Neither am I. The front door opened slightly, and Lily appeared holding her blue notebook. She looked between them with a sleepy smile. Are you both still awake? Ethan nodded. We are. Lily walked closer and held out the notebook. I wrote something new. Victoria opened the page carefully. The handwriting was still small, but the words were clear. Thank you for sending someone who chooses us. Victoria looked at the sentence for a long moment. The world had once taught her that miracles arrive through wealth, power, and impossible achievements. But standing on that old porch beneath the quiet stars, she finally understood something different. Some miracles arrive slowly, some arrive softly, and some arrive as a simple choice to stay. Years later, people would remember the business decisions Victoria Hayes made and the company she transformed. But the people who truly knew her would remember something far more important. They would remember the day a powerful woman discovered that the greatest success in life was not building an empire. It was building a home filled with love, respect, and second chances.